The Homesteads to Hollywood podcast is a CJSW original production funded by the Radio Meter Program Grant through the Community Radio Fund of Canada. In the spirit of respect, reciprocity, and truth, we would also like to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta. This includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Pigeonholed, and Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, which includes the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The city of Calgary, traditionally recognized by the Blackfoot name of Mohkinstsis, is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. Part 3. Áísaiksisttoo.
I think a lot of times in our industry, it's a very individualistic, egotistical hierarchy, and that's the way it's been constructed and built. And I've always been interested in dismantling that. In Western films, where Native people in our images have been exploited, Native people have been exploited since the dawn of cinema. And so how do we take those structures that are in place and dismantle them and rebuild them with our values? When you look at our stories and skills and knowledge and you're transferring that, that's like a gift exchange. And so that's how we should be making films. That's how we should be teaching each other and growing.
From Cool Runnings to The Revenant and Brokeback Mountain to The Last of Us, cinematic star power didn't just happen to Alberta. In fact, the province has a long and illustrious history in film that has developed into an internationally renowned industry. From Homesteads to Hollywood, Alberta takes center stage in this 10-part exploration into how things came to be and where they're going. My name is Liam Daw.
And I'm Ingrid Vargas. Together we'll be peeling back the layers of Alberta's intricate film industry to answer the question, just how did we get here? There are many elements that each play their role in this ecosystem, such as a storied past, a vibrant underground, a deep talent pool in the trades, and of course, the continuous run-on blockbusters. For Part 3, Áísaiksisttoo, which is the Blackfoot word for film or television, we're shifting the spotlight onto Alberta's original storytellers. For many, many years, oral traditions of the province's Indigenous communities have been steeped in meaningful narrative, and that's something that has naturally translated into the novelties of film and cinema. In Part 1, Movie People, we learned that the Plains tribes such as the Stoney Nakoda and Siksika have dignified histories in film that go back to the late 19th century.
There were certainly many proud moments on and off camera, but for the most part, Indigenous peoples across North America have been misrepresented and pigeonholed into heavy, harmful stereotypes in Hollywood. Because of this, those in the industry have had to rebuild their own image in a way that reflects the values that they hold.
As an important side note about this episode, and in particular its content, nobody on our current production team has any Indigenous Canadian heritage. This has pushed us to tell as much of these stories through the lens of Indigenous lived experience as possible. While we eagerly celebrate this core element of Alberta's film industry, we do not forget the centuries of endured racism and assimilation, nor the countless atrocities under colonialism towards Canada's Indigenous communities. As a podcast, Homesteads to Hollywood has opted to spotlight Indigenous cinema, not as a compartmentalized quota, but because of the significance and impact that it poses to the film industry as a whole. You'll be hearing from Liam and I less frequently than in other episodes, as we make a little extra space for our conversations with Cree Actor Michelle Thrush and Siksika Filmmaker Trevor Solway.
Trevor Solway is a Blackfoot filmmaker from Siksika Nation. As a recipient of Mount Royal University's Horizon Award for Early Career Accomplishment and distinguished by Avenue Magazine's Top 40 Under 40 in Calgary, Trevor is a part of the vanguard that's subverting tropes and pushing boundaries around what Indigenous cinema is and how it's interpreted. With standout projects such as the horror comedy series Tales from the Res and the feature documentary Kitokitopi, The Horse He Never Rode, Trevor is making waves within Alberta's and even Canada's film landscape through challenging the stigmas pertaining to what he calls the little brown box.
My name is Trevor Solway. I'm a Blackfoot filmmaker from Siksika Nation. Yeah, I was born and raised here. I was, born in Calgary, raised in Siksika. I lived there for the first 18 years of my life. And, as a kid growing up in Siksika, it's a very rural reserve, the second largest in Canada. So you can really feel isolated at times. As a huge cowboy culture, horsemanship. I grew up with a lot of Indian cowboys my grandpa, my uncles, my cousins. So I was surrounded by like a lot of masculinity, but I was always a really sensitive kid and never really felt like I fit in. But I was always, super aware of everything and my emotions and in a way bored on my grandpa's ranch, and it would always kind of escape in my imagination. But I grew up listening to a lot of stories. We did a lot of chores growing up with my grandpa, but we always made time for cookies and tea and stories and that kind of stuff. I just grew up with a lot of colorful characters on the res. But I always wanted to be a filmmaker. I loved watching movies. Just everything about it. And I always watch the credits and just be fascinated how many people came together to make this film. And so I always wanted to be a filmmaker. I always wanted to be a director, a writer. But I didn't see anybody who looked like me making movies. I didn't see native directors or people, like Quentin Tarantino, Martin Scorsese. I didn't see any natives that were doing it. So I didn't really think it was a possibility for me. And I was always the first one to graduate high school, go to university and carve out a career path and trailblaze. So I was always trying to figure it out on my own. And so, as a sensitive kid, I was always taking that in too. I'm not good at being a cowboy, but I never seen anybody graduate before me. So what does the future have in store for me? So just growing up with that sensitivity and that creativity, it was like a gift, but it was also kind of like a curse in a way too. And when I went out to Vancouver for film school at Capilano University, it was an all Indigenous film program. First time I experienced Native people making films, and we watched a lot of real Indigenous films made by Indigenous directors and writers, and not just these Western films where a lot of times it wasn't even Native people in front of the camera. It was every other race, but in brown skin and wigs and just all this phony stuff that was been shoved down our throats for so long about Native people. Anytime you see Native people in films, we were always in these Western films. We're always like the bad guys. We're always getting shot off a horse. We're always the villains. We're always the savage. And our image has just been taken, repurposed for so many different reasons. We've been the noble Indian. We've been the savage Indian. We've been the beads and feather Indian. We've been the activism Indian. But we've rarely been seen as real people. You see this everywhere. Western films, sports logos, every kind of marketing. Beef jerky, anything that has a native in a headdress, that's been our image. And then in a more factual sense, in a doc sense, we're always seen as the native that's, missing and murdered or wanted or on the streets. When you think about young native kids who are growing up in this ultra pop culture, environment, what does that do for their confidence and their ideas of their potential? The Blackfoot people were originally from here in Alberta and Montana. We're very, prairie people. But in Vancouver, there was a lot of Blackfoot filmmakers trying to, go into school, starting their careers. Alberta Tailfeathers is one of them. Cowboy Smith, Colin Van Loon, Damien Eaglebear. There's about 8 of them, or 8 of us, I guess. And I was the youngest one. I was about 21, and they were all in their 30s. I was always their PA, the assistant cam or assistant director. So I soaked in a lot of their knowledge. And it was always fun. It was always a sense of community. Almost every weekend I was out there, we were working on somebody's short film or music video or corporate thing. And, it was really cool to just be a part of that. When I left, I wanted to create that sense of community back home in Siksika. And so it was a culture shock. That year I was out there, I learned so much. But also I didn't realize how much I valued and missed home, how much I missed Siksika and Alberta and Calgary. A lot of my peers and teachers wanted me to stay in film school, but I loved home so much, so I came back. That's almost 10 years ago, and I've been making films ever since. And life goes on, and everyone's careers go different ways. Some of us still work in film, some of us don't. I still collaborate with some of those people today. And Alberta Tailfeathers, is one of my mentors, and I'm always asking her for advice on different things in the industry.
There are more than a few Indigenous Albertans influencing the film industry landscape, not only in the province, but across Canada and even beyond. Kainai Sami writer, director, producer, and actor Alberta Tailfeathers is certainly one of those people.
Being a recipient of awards and recognition on both sides of the camera, Tailfeathers' multifaceted skill set is rooted in her activism, particularly towards advocating for First Nations communities, including her own on the Blood Reserve in southern Alberta. Whether it's her talent as an actor in a film like Night Raiders and a series such as Amazon's Three Pines, or as a director, evidenced by acclaimed projects such as The Body Remembers When the World Broke Open and Rebel, Alberta Tailfeathers has a definitive influence on the current and next generation of young filmmakers in Alberta.
In particular, her influence is apparent in the independent Indigenous film communities, much like the cohort Trevor described during his time at Capilano University. Taking on a role as mentor isn't something that Elamaya has shied away from either. On an interview during the CBC's Q with Tom Power, she shed light on some of the procedures her and her co-director Kathleen Hepburn took on their award-winning film The Body Remembers When the World Broke Open.
One thing that guided us throughout was that we wanted to do no harm, and we wanted to create a sense of family and a sense of respect on set. We wanted to hire as many Indigenous crew members as possible, but there's a gap in the industry. There aren't enough of us working in the key departments, say sound, editing, lighting, all of those things. And so we wanted to be able to help build capacity. So we hired 11 Indigenous young people who all wanted to work in film in all of our key departments, and they worked in a collaborative way with the head of each department. And we gave priority to youth who have aged out of foster care. And that added sort of this gravity to the work. It grounded us in something real, and these youth brought something so incredible every day to set. And we ensured that our entire crew had to go through cultural competency training and Indigenous history training to understand that what we were doing was very much rooted in something real.
Out on the Siksika Reservation, Trevor has made incredible efforts to provide hands-on opportunities in film to the Indigenous youth of his own community. The Not Be Collective has established the presence of grassroots filmmaking for many young Blackfoot creatives who probably wouldn't have gotten the chance to otherwise.
Yeah, it was funny. I was mentoring kids when I was still a kid. I was in my early 20s, mentoring youth on my reserve. It just taught me to be a better communicator and a better leader. And so that's what we're trying to do with the Not Be Collective, is to tell stories in our own way, in a truthful way, an authentic way. And also to not box Indigenous people into this little brown box of all your stories are traumatic, all your stories are preserving, the language or a dying culture, or just all these things that get put onto us. You can be free to tell any story you want. You can tell a sci-fi story, you can tell a horror story, you can tell a dystopian story. And in the Not Be Collective, we've done that. We've made, all sorts of genre films, and they're a lot of fun making them. And it's cool to see our community and our young filmmakers really find their voice and their place on set. As, I guess, the leader of the Not Be Collective, I produce all the films. I loathe producing. I love to write and direct. But for my community, I'll take the helm and do this because there's nobody else to do it. We're making our 10th short film, and it's all been first-time directors and writers and people in front of the camera. That's really important, is to put our youth and our emerging filmmakers in leadership positions on set. Because a lot of times when Native people want to get anywhere in the film industry, we're always kind of put in these junior positions or these learning positions, these consultant positions, that there's no room for growth. It's like checking a checkbox off your list. That's a big thing, is putting people in positions to succeed. Filmmaking is a lot of hard work. It's a lot of, there's never enough time, there's never enough money. We always say that, we make the film, great, but that's not the priority. We shouldn't sacrifice each other and our friendships and our relationships for the sake of the film. It's always about each other before the film.
And how do you think the youth at Siksika have responded to your call to make projects with love and storytelling at the helm rather than following tropes and stereotypes in order to get recognition? How have they responded to this kind of new way of approaching it? And how have these avenues within the reserve opened up opportunities beyond the Not Be Collective?
Yeah, I think they've responded really well. We made 3 films off a $10,000 grant. It wasn't a whole lot of money to go around. Everybody got paid $200 across the board, even myself. And it was just enough just to get us to set, and the rest would go towards equipment and food and that kind of stuff. As a youth growing up on the reserve, I've seen big opportunities come to the reserve, cool workshops or camps, and they're there for a week, and then they leave with all their knowledge and their resources and their money. And you're left there being oh, that was a cool experience, but what do I do with it now? And that was always the goal for the Not Be Collective, is to exist in Siksika as a sustainable entity or body or community. It's the second largest reserve in Canada, so I would have to go and pick up the youth all across this humongous place. Say we have a production meeting that starts at 5 p.m. I'd leave at 3 p.m. from Calgary, pick up all the youth, and then bring them to the meeting. We'd meet for 2 hours, and I'd drop everybody back off. So a 2-hour meeting would be maybe a 6, 7, 8 hour commitment to me. And then when it comes to production, we're already doing 8, 10-hour days, and you add on 2 hours on both ends for me. I really burnt myself out in that first year of making films, but I was just so driven by the passion. I think the way I showed up for the youth and our members, they're still around today. All these years later, we're still together. And now they're doing their own thing. They're videographers. They're capable of shooting a project, editing it themselves, delivering it. They just have so much technical know-how. And then we also have our members who are actors who are, always in front of the camera, more of like a writer, director kind of thing. It's been a really cool experience to grow different people's individual wants and needs or desires in the industry. And a lot of like the work I've done with Tales from the Res and some of the, the bigger docs I've done, it's always been about trying to put our people in front of the camera in a human way. And this is a long game, because I'm always thinking about the little res kids who are watching our stuff or watching TV, and to see authentic stories and to see how they can see themselves in film and media and what that does for their potential. We would hear a lot of these ghost stories around the community, and they're always told as if they were real. And they always got my imagination going crazy and my creativity, buzzing. I think there's something about that authenticity compared to this fantastical way Native people have been shown to be like, we're just going to be sitting on a mountaintop, giving you a spirit animal or an Indian name, And I think that's what happens when you have an outside perspective making our stories, is we're always going to be this shrouded in fantasy or myth. And so for Tales from the Res, we wanted to create this like realism mixed with our spirituality, mixed with the supernatural.
Have you ever heard of the stereotypes?
What?
The water spirits.
Yeah. My grandma actually told me about them. Do you think they're around here?
I don't know.
I think it's exciting to be a part of the Alberta film industry, but I still think we need ways to go in terms of authentic representation and to make space or get out of the way for Indigenous writers and directors. There's so many times where like I get approached to be tokenized, to, check a box or be a consultant on these shows. I'm like, why didn't you just let me write and direct it instead of trying to still hold on to the creative control, and it's not your story to tell. And so I think the tokenization of our people has to stop. And, that's a message to the producers, here. It's like that saying, nothing about us without us. If you're going to tell a story about us, it has to be with us, not just in front of the camera, but behind the camera as well. If you don't come from that lived experience, inherently you're just going to be putting somebody in a costume, in regalia, in a headdress. Unless it's coming from like an authentic place where you get a lot of the nuances and intricacies, the beauty, and also the, the trauma that comes with growing up on the reserve or growing up Indigenous. You'll always be telling it from an outside perspective. When I think about home, when I think about Alberta, I always think about like the wealth of stories that exist here. And I think about, my ancestors who are very closely tied to the buffalo. And there's always a story that we tell. When it's a blizzard happening or a storm, a buffalo, charges right through it. Whereas other animals will look to find shelter, wait out the storm. It's a harsh environment, but it's worth it in the end. That's the kind of sentiment I take out of it. A lot of times it's really hard making films, but if you just persevere and push through it, it's a really beautiful experience. It's exciting to be a part of, and I'll always be here to create space for Indigenous voices.
And something I always say is this isn't something we just began doing. We have been storytellers for thousands of years, because that's how our elders, that's what they would do to ignite imagination in our children, was they would pass these stories down through oral tradition. And it was a way of teaching. It was a way of expanding young kids. It's something we've been doing for a long time. Now we just use a camera or a stage.
That is the voice of Michelle Thrush, a Cree actor born and raised in Calgary. There's a good chance you've seen her on screen, as she's been cast into films and TV series going back to the mid-1980s. Michelle first made a name for herself on the CBC drama North of 60, but is perhaps most recognized for playing the role of Gail Stoney during a 5-season run on the APTN showcase series Blackstone, originally filmed in Edmonton and produced by Calgary-based, Indigenous-owned Prairie Dog Film and Television.
In 2011, Michelle was a recipient of a Gemini Award for Best Actress in a Drama Series for her work on Blackstone, and has since picked up Leo and Canadian Screen Awards. Just last year, she was recognized for her work in the film industry through the Lieutenant Governor of Alberta's Arts Award for Distinguished Artist, something she embraced alongside her community in Maple Creek on Treaty 4 territory where her family hails from.
Michelle has had a long and illustrious career in Alberta's film and television industry. but it almost didn't even happen. As a teenager with a tumultuous upbringing, she had initially pondered a career in social work centered around helping children. It wasn't until one of her mentors, Gordon Tutusis, a well-established First Nations actor of Cree and Stoney descent, pushed her to follow her heart and pursue work as an actor.
Gordon Tutusis, my gosh, he influenced my life so much as a human being and as an actor and as a father figure. When I was a little girl, I can remember like scanning television, trying to figure out, why is there not more real, true Native people on television? I always saw our people as losers in the storyline. A lot of times, Native women running out of burning teepees looking for white saviors. So I was always trying to figure out, why are our people not represented properly in the television and film industry? We were always romanticized and all that. And I can remember I saw Chief Dan George, who I just adored as a kid, on Little Big Man. But there wasn't a lot of human beings. It was always that romanticized Indigenous chief, or, those looks. And then we started getting these bit roles. I started noticing, like on Running Brave, seeing, Tantu and Margot Kane and little tiny bit roles here and there. And I was just starved for seeing ourselves. And then I remember seeing Gordon Tutusis, and I don't even remember the name of the first show I saw him in. But I was a teenager. I loved acting. I had a really good friend who was Gordon's niece. And she's like, my uncle's coming in tonight. Do you want to meet him? And I was thrilled. I was like, yes. So he came in. We sat up and drank tea for hours. He recognized that I had this light for acting, this small light inside of me, and he wanted to nurture that light. So he paid special attention to that. In my brain, I'm like, I don't know if I can be an actor, though, because there's really not a lot of projects on the go. We're not a hot commodity. And, I noticed we've only got these little tiny bit roles in films. And he's like, it doesn't matter, Michelle. We need to come out in full force. We need to bring our stories to the forefront. And if you have an urge to tell these stories from a place of honesty, then you need to nurture that and go forward with that. Those words stuck with me. And he's like, and you're not going to be able to do that in Calgary. You're going to have to move. So I was just about to graduate, grade 12. My first film was in 1984. I played on a feature called Isaac Littlefeathers in Edmonton. Yeah, I was about to graduate, and then I received a role in Winnipeg for an NFB series called Daughters of the Country. And again, it was just sort of a side job. And in my brain, I'm like, I'm going to be a social worker and I'm going to change the world. And then, Gordon really pushed me to honor that part of me that wanted to be an actor. And I listened to his words and I moved to Vancouver. I realized how acting had so much more strength than being a social worker. My urge inside of wanting to do something that would make a difference in the world, it kept leaning more and more towards acting. I remember the first few years, there was, like I said, not a lot going on. So I was working in a restaurant, but I just kept feeling this feeling of, I have to be a part of this business. I have to do something that, be a part of projects that are going to be truthful of who we are as Indigenous people. And I stuck to it, even though I wanted to give up and quit quite a few times in those early years. I guess it was in 1992. Because I moved to Vancouver in 1989, but in 1992 is when Dances with Wolves came out. And I wasn't in it, but I got to see all of these heroes of mine in it, and it gave me more hope. Yeah, doing more bit roles. And then North of 60 came into the scene, and that's really when the flame got lit for Indigenous actors, I think, especially, here in Alberta. I got onto that show, and then just more things started coming, and it just kind of rolled. Acting has never been this fame and fortune and limousines for Indigenous people. We all consider it to be a medium of not only telling our stories, but offering some sense of filling that space of being present in this industry and having, young people turn on a TV and go, wow, that's me. I see that. That's my story. That's my uniqueness. We were often put into boxes of how to be and how to act. And I've been put into those boxes myself in my early career of, having bad buckskins and, just bad depictions of who we were, because we were being filtered through white Hollywood and, white eyes. And as actors, we played roles through the years that often I look back and I think, man, I wish I didn't do that. this was all part of the evolution. And now I see we've got our own people producing and directing and story writing and acting. And, I've been really proud to see that happen through the years.
So this is going back to something that Trevor mentioned to me in our conversation about Indigenous heritage defining his work. He did say that being Indigenous, everything he produces, everything he works on will inherently be Indigenous just because that's who he is, that's his lens. But at the same time, he wanted to demonstrate that Indigenous Canadians can be cast into any role instead of kind of being compartmentalized into these traditional tropes. How has auditioning for the various roles throughout your career shaped your perception on this in particular, and what creatively can be adjusted so that writers and producers don't fall into these cycles of Indigenous role casting tropes?
So this is something that I have been speaking up for many years, like way back, in the early 2000s, late 90s, I was always very aware that we need to play human beings. We've gone past this whole noble Indian or, whatever the stereotypes of what those boxes were that we were being forced into. And so, we are at a place right now, and it's starting to happen slowly. And I'm really happy to see that going on. But it's taken a lot of fight through the years to be able to say no. I've been placed in that position also where I've had to fight with producers about how they want the Indigenous person to look and how I know our people look. So it's a struggle still. It's not been as bad, but I've had to go against many non-Native producers. It really depends on the money, right? Like who is in control of the funding. When we have more Indigenous people placed into roles of producer, that to me is a benefit to the story. Like Prey had an Indigenous producer on it. So it was something that I was really grateful for because I didn't have to fight and say, well, no, that's not how this teepee would be. Or there's been so many times that we've had to stand up for the integrity of the scenes and the props and the wardrobe and the language. And having an Indigenous producer on set is something that is such a beautiful luxury in a way, because it just allows us to focus on the story and not have to continuously be on the lookout for things that we shouldn't have to worry about as actors. The more we have that ability to tell our stories without having to fight for integrity is always a win. I can only see good things coming. We have fought hard through the years, and I can't imagine going backwards. We've got beautiful filmmakers and directors out there, Almaya Tailfeathers and Jen Podemsky and so many amazing women. I have to say that because there's a lot of women that are really pushing that boundary. I think it's only going to get better and better. We've been waiting to tell our stories for so long. And so this is the time. For me, what really makes me happy is independence. Obviously, I've done a lot of the studio kind of stuff through the years also, which is a luxury to, take your time doing scenes and all that stuff. And then you get into these independents where it's not as much money and it's a lot quicker. But to me, that's where the real gold is independent films that are told from a place of just incredible sincerity and genuineness. And those are the stories that I love.
It was a wonderful coincidence that, unprompted, Michelle chose to shed a loving light onto independent film, specifically the women who are creating the art form and cultivating the community here in Alberta. Coincidentally, but not unintentionally, Part 4 of this series will shift the narrative to the pioneers of independent film in the province through a queer and femme lens. Stay with us as we navigate another core element of the foundation that is Alberta's film industry.
We'd like to extend our sincere appreciation to guests Trevor Solway and Michelle Thrush for their unparalleled insight towards the Indigenous experience within Alberta's film industry. Homesteads to Hollywood is a CJSW original recorded and produced in Calgary, Alberta. Our outreach coordinator is Natalie Schmidt. Audio editing is from Maria Pladneva. Assistant production and research from Ingrid Vargas, and is executively produced by myself, Liam Daw. Our theme song is Clean Conscience by Calgary's Young Neighbors. Music for this episode is from Nahia Cree artist Matthew Cardinal. In order of appearance, clips and sound bites throughout this episode come from the CBC's Q with Tom Power and Trevor Solway's Tales from the Res.